An exciting story of redemption, love, passion, and new beginnings. He just wanted to help an elderly woman, but he was inexperienced and had no idea what awaited him behind that door. A millionaire stared at him and said, "I've been waiting for you since yesterday. Watch this story until the end, you'll be surprised by it." If you like stories of love and romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. We post videos like this every day, continuing. The silence in the Upper East Side apartment had weight. It was dense like the air before a storm, filled with memories that Isaiah still couldn't fully decipher. 3 months had passed since he'd begun caring for Teresa Wilson, and he had already grown accustomed to the meticulous routine she demanded. Medications at 9 in the morning, bath at 2 in the afternoon, dinner precisely at 7. She was strict with schedules, but gentle in the way she guided him through the house, teaching him where each object was positioned, how she liked things arranged. Isaiah observed the 68-year-old woman glide through the rooms with a precision that defied her blindness. Teresa knew every inch of that place, every crack in the wooden floor, every curve of the antique furniture. Her fingers traveled across surfaces as if reading invisible stories, and sometimes she would stop in front of the grand piano that dominated the living room, running her hands over the keys without touching them, as if listening to melodies only she could hear. "Do you know why I stopped playing?" she asked one March afternoon, while Isaiah organized her medications in the kitchen. The question came from nowhere, as always happened with her. Teresa didn't follow conversation protocols. She simply released thoughts into the air and expected him to catch them. "No, ma'am." Isaiah continued separating the pills into the compartments of the weekly dispenser, the metallic sound echoing through the apartment. He had learned not to ask too many questions. Teresa spoke when she wanted to speak, and forcing anything only made her close up like an oyster. "It was because of a man," she said, and her voice carried a weight that made Isaiah look up. "Have you ever loved someone, Isaiah?" The question caught him off guard. Isaiah swallowed hard, feeling the familiar heat rise up his neck. It was these questions that reminded him of who he was, or rather who he had never been. "No, ma'am. Never had time for those things." Teresa laughed, a hoarse sound that seemed to come from somewhere very deep. "Time? Boy, love isn't a matter of time. It's a matter of courage." She approached him, her steps slow but sure. "And you, my dear Isaiah, are afraid to feel." She wasn't wrong. Isaiah carried fear like a second skin, woven through years of religious indoctrination and ancestral guilt. His father, Pastor Ezekiel, had hammered into his head since childhood that the body was a source of sin, that desire was a manifestation of the devil, that purity was the only path to salvation. Every lingering look, every impure thought, every involuntary tremor before another's beauty was cause for long sessions of prayer and penance. "The body is the temple of the Lord," his father used to say, his index finger pointed at him like a spear. "And you, my son, were chosen to keep it pure." Isaiah grew up believing in this purity, embracing it as a life purpose. Until the age of 24, he had only touched a few hands in formal greetings, a few fraternal hugs at church. Nothing beyond that. His skin was unexplored territory, a blank map that he himself had chosen to keep that way. The fire had changed everything. Isaiah still dreamed of that night. The flames licking the walls of the house where he'd grown up, the acrid smell of smoke, the screams of his parents trapped in the back bedroom. He had awakened, choking, run to them, but the door was blocked by a beam that had fallen from the ceiling. He tried to break the window, cut his shoulder on the glass, but couldn't get through. The firefighters arrived 2 hours later. Too late. He survived by chance or by fate, depending on how you looked at the situation. The scar on his right shoulder was the only physical proof of that night, a crescent-shaped mark that burned whenever the weather changed. But the invisible scars were larger, deeper. The guilt of having survived, the feeling that he should have done more, the constant question about why God had spared him of all people. That's why he left his hometown in the mountains of Virginia and moved to New York. He needed the sea, wide horizons, a place where no one knew him as the pastor's son who died in the fire. In the big city, he found work through an assistance network of the Baptist Church. Taking care of the elderly seemed a natural extension of his religious upbringing, a way to serve others without exposing himself too much, without having to talk about himself. Teresa had been assigned to him 3 months earlier, and from the first day she intrigued him. She wasn't a common elderly woman, one who resigned herself to solitude and dependence. There was something fierce about her, an intensity that her blindness hadn't diminished. Her grey hair was always impeccably styled, her clothes chosen with a care that suggested preserved vanity. She moved through the house like a queen in her palace, commanding the environment with a silent authority. "You have the hands of a frightened boy," she said that March afternoon, interrupting his thoughts. "But a heavy soul. That's contradictory." "Why? Do you say that?" Isaiah closed the medication dispenser and turned to her. Teresa was standing in front of the kitchen window, her face turned toward the light coming in, though she couldn't see it. "Because I hear things differently now," she answered. "When you lose your sight, the whole world becomes music, and you, my dear, play a sad melody." She moved away from the window and approached him again. "But there's something more, a dissonant note, as if your music was waiting for another music. To make sense." Isaiah felt a shiver run down his spine. Teresa had a particular way of speaking that disarmed him, as if she could see through him, reading secrets he didn't even know he carried. "I don't understand what you mean." "Not yet," she said, a mysterious smile playing on her lips. "But you will." That night, Isaiah went out to get the medications Teresa had requested. The pharmacy was 3 blocks from the building, a walk he had turned into a ritual. He liked walking the streets of the Upper East Side in the late afternoon, observing the movement of bars and restaurants, the comings and goings of people who seemed to carry an urgency he didn't understand. It was a different world from what he had known in the Virginia mountains, faster, more complex, but also more anonymous. Here, no one judged him for his purity or his strangeness. When he returned to the building, it was almost 9 at night. The doorman greeted him with a distracted wave, and he went up to the 12th floor where Teresa's apartment was located. But something was different. The door was ajar, a sliver of light escaping into the dark hallway. Isaiah hesitated. Teresa was meticulous about security, always locked the door even when he was home. She would never leave it open like this. He approached slowly, his heart accelerating. Maybe she had fallen ill, maybe she had fallen and couldn't get up. He gently pushed the door and entered. That's when he saw him. A man was standing in the living room, his back to the entrance, observing the grand piano. He was tall, must have been at least 6'1", his broad shoulders perfectly filling a dark blazer that seemed to have been tailored especially for his body. His hair was graying, at the temples but still thick and well cut. Even from behind, he radiated a presence that made the air in the room seem thicker. The man turned slowly, as if he had sensed Isaiah's presence even before hearing him enter, and when their eyes met, the world seemed to stop. He was handsome, in a way that hurt. Not the young, ephemeral beauty that Isaiah was used to seeing in faces around him, but a mature beauty, sculpted by time and experience. His eyes were dark, almost black, and there was a depth to them that suggested stories that would take a lifetime to tell. His face was angular, with a well-groomed beard that accentuated the strong line of his jaw. The first few buttons of his shirt were open, revealing a muscular neck and the beginning of a broad chest, where a silver chain rested, supporting a black stone that seemed to absorb the light around it. "I've been waiting for you since yesterday," the man said, his voice husky, carrying a disguised Manhattan accent that revealed more sophisticated origins. It wasn't a question, it wasn't an explanation. It was a statement, as if Isaiah's presence there was not only expected but inevitable. Isaiah stood frozen in the middle of the living room, the pharmacy bags weighing in his hands like concrete blocks. He tried to speak, to ask who this man was, what he was doing there, where Teresa was, but the words refused to come out. There was something in that gaze that completely disarmed him, that made all his religious education and carefully constructed defenses melt like wax before fire. "You must be Isaiah," the man continued, approaching with slow, calculated steps. "Teresa has told me a lot about you." He stopped a few meters away, close enough for Isaiah to smell his cologne, a mixture of wood and spices that was both familiar and completely unknown. Where is Mrs. Teresa?" Isaiah managed to ask, his voice coming out weaker than he would have liked. "Sleeping," the man answered, his eyes never leaving Isaiah's face. "Took her sleeping pill earlier today, said she needed to rest for tomorrow." A minimal smile touched his lips. "I think she knew I would come." "Who are you, sir?" "Vincent Wilson." The name came out of his mouth like a formal introduction, but there was something in the way he said it that suggested intimacy, as if he was sharing a secret. "I'm Teresa's nephew." Somewhat distant, but a nephew nonetheless. Isaiah had heard that name before. Teresa had mentioned a Vincent a few times, always in passing, always with a tone that mixed pride and concern. "The boy who became a man before his time," she had once said, "who built an empire to prove he could, but forgot to build a family to share it with." "I didn't know she had family," Isaiah said, still holding the bags, not knowing whether he should put them down or prepare to leave. "Teresa's family is complicated," Vincent replied, taking another step toward him. "Most of them preferred to forget her when she lost her sight and isolated herself here. I'm one of the few who still care." His eyes moved down Isaiah's body slowly, almost scientifically, as if cataloguing important details. "And you, do you have family?" The question hit Isaiah like a punch to the stomach. "No, not anymore." Vincent tilted his head, an expression of genuine interest crossing his face. "Anymore. My parents died in a fire 2 years ago." The words came out automatically, as they always did when someone asked. It was easier to say it quickly, like ripping off a Band-Aid, so the pain would pass quickly. But Vincent didn't do what people normally did. He didn't offer empty condolences, didn't change the subject awkwardly, didn't make a face of pity. Instead, he nodded slowly, as if understanding something that went beyond words. "Fire," he said, more to himself than to Isaiah. "It's a strange way to die. A lot of noise, a lot of drama. Death is usually quieter." He came a little closer, now near enough for Isaiah to see the small scars that marked his hands, the lines of expression around his eyes, the way the silver chain rose and fell with his breathing. "And you? How did you survive?" "I woke up first. Tried to save them, but couldn't." Isaiah's voice was trembling now, and he hated that. Hated how this man could make him feel so exposed, so vulnerable. Vincent observed the scar on Isaiah's shoulder, which was partially visible through the collar of his shirt. "Is that where you got hurt?" Isaiah nodded, unable to form words. There was something hypnotic about the way Vincent spoke, as if each question was carefully calculated to open layers that Isaiah had spent years trying to keep closed. "May I see?" The question was asked with disconcerting naturalness, as if it were the most normal thing in the world to ask to see a stranger's scar. Isaiah felt the blood rush to his face, the familiarity of the heat of shame mixed with something new, something he couldn't name. "I don't think that. It's just a scar, Isaiah." Vincent said his name in a way that made something contract in his stomach. "I'm not asking you to take off your clothes, I just want to see how you carry your marks." There was something in Vincent's voice that made it impossible to say no. It wasn't authoritative, it wasn't threatening. It was simply irresistible, as if he had a natural power to make people want to please him. Isaiah put the bags on the floor and, with trembling fingers, pulled the collar of his shirt to the side, exposing the crescent-shaped scar that adorned his right shoulder. Vincent came closer, so close that Isaiah could feel the heat emanating from his body. He raised his hand as if to touch the mark, but stopped a few centimeters from Isaiah's skin, his fingers suspended in the air as if reading something invisible. "Interesting," he murmured. "It looks like a crescent moon, or an open mouth ready to bite." His eyes rose to meet Isaiah's again. "Do you believe in destiny?" "I don't know." Isaiah was having trouble breathing. Vincent's proximity was doing strange things to his body, accelerating his pulse, making his skin tingle, awakening sensations he had spent a lifetime trying to suppress. "I do," Vincent said, lowering his hand but not moving away. "I believe some people are born to meet each other, that some stories begin long before the protagonists meet." He smiled, and there was something predatory in that smile, something that made Isaiah's knees shake. "You have the eyes of someone who is waiting for something without knowing what." "You speak in riddles, sir," Isaiah managed to say, trying to regain some control over the situation. "It's a habit," Vincent admitted. "I spend a lot of time alone. When you live surrounded by employees and subordinates, you lose the practice of simple conversations." He finally moved away, but his eyes remained fixed on Isaiah. "Teresa told me you're very religious." "I was raised in the church," Isaiah replied, grateful to have returned to a safer subject. "And still are, religious, I mean." The question caught Isaiah off guard. It was something he himself had wondered about in the last 2 years since his parents' death. His faith had been shaken in a way he couldn't repair, like a broken vase that even when glued would never be the same again. "I don't know anymore," he admitted. "After the fire, a lot changed, I imagine." Vincent walked to the piano and ran his fingers over the keys, a soft sound echoing through the apartment. "Teresa often says that God has a peculiar sense of humor, that he puts the right people in the wrong situations just to see what happens." "Do you believe in God?" Vincent laughed, a low, husky sound that seemed to come from the back of his throat. "I believe in many things, Isaiah. In God, in destiny, in the strength of human will, in the beauty of desire." His eyes met Isaiah's again, and this time there was something different in them, something that made the air in the room feel heavier. "But mainly, I believe that people spend their entire lives denying themselves things that would make them happy for fear of what others will think." "And you? Do you deny yourself anything?" The question came out before Isaiah could contain himself, and he immediately regretted it. There was something very intimate about it, very personal for someone he had met less than an hour ago. But Vincent didn't seem bothered. Instead, he smiled again, that smile that was both invitation and threat. "I denied myself many things throughout life," he said. "I built my company by denying impulses, controlling emotions, keeping distance from anything that could weaken me." He came closer again, and this time Isaiah didn't back away. "But lately I've been wondering if it's worth it." They stood looking at each other in silence for a moment that seemed to last hours. Isaiah felt as if he were being studied, analyzed, measured by some criterion he didn't understand. And at the same time, there was something in that look that made him feel seen in a way he had never experienced before. Not as the pastor's son, not as the pure church boy, not as the victim of the fire, but as a man. As someone desirable. The thought frightened him so much that he took a step back. "I need to put away the medications," he said quickly, picking up the bags from the floor. "Mrs. Teresa gets angry if I leave things disorganized." "Of course." Vincent didn't try to stop him, but his voice carried a tone of amusement, as if he understood exactly why Isaiah was running away. "I don't want to cause problems." Isaiah headed for the kitchen with hurried steps, his hands trembling as he removed the medications from the bags. He could feel Vincent's eyes on his back, a warm weight that made his skin tingle. He tried to concentrate on the task, organizing the medicines in alphabetical order, checking the expiration dates, anything to keep his mind occupied. But it didn't work. His head was full of images he couldn't expel. Vincent's hands suspended over his scar, the predatory smile, the dark eyes that seemed to see through him. And there was something else, something that frightened him even more than physical attraction. It was the sensation of recognition, as if some part of him, deep down, knew who Vincent Wilson was even before meeting him. "Isaiah." His voice sounded behind him, closer than expected. Isaiah turned and found Vincent standing at the kitchen entrance, his body completely filling the doorway. "Yes?" "I'll be back tomorrow." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. "Teresa will want to see me, and I would like to talk more with you." "About what?" Vincent tilted his head, as if considering the question. "About many things. About you. About her, about how the world works. He paused, his eyes slowly scanning Isaiah's face. About what you want from life. I just want to take care of Mrs. Teresa and do my job right. That's not wanting, Isaiah. That's surviving. Vincent took another step closer. Wanting is different. Wanting hurts, burns, forces you to make difficult choices. His voice got lower, more intimate. When was the last time you truly wanted something? The question hit. Isaiah like lightning. When had it been? He couldn't remember. His whole life had been built around denials, renunciations, accepting what was given to him without questioning. Wanting seemed like a luxury he had never allowed himself. I don't think about it, Vincent interrupted gently, until tomorrow, and then he was gone, leaving only the echo of his footsteps in the hallway and a cologne that took minutes to dissipate. Isaiah stood in the kitchen, his heart beating so hard it seemed the whole building could hear it. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in the small bed in the maid's room that Teresa had prepared for him, looking at the ceiling and trying to understand what had happened. Vincent Wilson had entered his life like a hurricane, disordering everything he thought he knew about himself, about his limits, about his desires. And the question kept echoing in his mind. When was the last time you truly wanted something? Maybe never. Maybe that was the most frightening answer of all. Vincent returned the next day, as he had promised. Isaiah saw him through the living room window, getting out of a black Porsche that looked like it had come straight out of a luxury magazine. He watched the man cross the street with the same feline confidence as the night before. The dark grey suit, embracing his body in a way that suggested expensive tailoring and attention to detail. Today there was no tie, just a white shirt with the first few buttons open, revealing the same silver chain that had hypnotized Isaiah the night before. Teresa had been awake for hours, more agitated than usual. She had asked Isaiah to arrange her jewelry, choose her most elegant navy blue dress, comb her hair more carefully. When Vincent comes to visit me, I like to be presentable, she explained, but there was something in her voice that suggested nervousness, an expectation that went beyond simple vanity. Does he come often? Isaiah asked while adjusting the pearl earrings in her ears. Not always, Teresa replied, her fingers drumming nervously on the arm of the chair. Vincent is a very busy man. He has businesses in several countries, travels constantly. When he shows up here, it's because something important is happening. The intercom rang before Isaiah could ask what she meant by something important. When he opened the apartment door, Vincent was there, standing in the hallway with a bouquet of white orchids in one hand and a leather folder in the other. Her favorite orchids, Isaiah noticed, remembering the vases scattered around the living room. Good morning, Vincent said, his eyes immediately finding Isaiah's. There was something different about him today, a contained energy that made the air around him seem electrically charged. Did you sleep well? The question seemed innocent, but the way he asked it with that half-smile that didn't reach his eyes reminded Isaiah of how he had spent the night awake, thinking about him, trying to understand what was happening to himself. Yes, Isaiah lied, stepping aside to let him in. Mrs. Teresa is waiting for you. Vincent stopped in the middle of the living room, observing Teresa, who was sitting in her favorite armchair, hands crossed in her lap, an expectant expression on her face. He approached her with measured steps, placed the orchids on her side table and leaned down to kiss her forehead. Aunt, he said softly, and there was genuine affection in his voice. You look beautiful today. Stop with these flatteries, Vincent, Teresa replied, but her voice carried pleasure. You only call me aunt when you want something. Vincent laughed, sitting on the sofa in front of her. Always so perceptive. That's why I like you so much, ma'am. His eyes moved briefly to Isaiah, who was standing near the kitchen, not knowing whether to leave or stay. Isaiah, come sit with us. What I have to say concerns you too. This caught Isaiah completely off guard. Me? Sit down, Vincent repeated, indicating an armchair next to Teresa's. There was something in his voice that didn't allow for discussion. Isaiah sat reluctantly, his hands sweating as he watched Vincent open the leather folder and take out some documents. There was something official about those papers, something that made his stomach contract with anxiety. "Teresa," Vincent began, his voice taking on a more formal tone, "do you remember the conversation we had last year about your final wishes?" "Of course I remember," she replied, her voice becoming more serious. "My mind may be old, but it's not senile." "Good. Then you remember that we talked about certain provisions in your will." Vincent looked at Isaiah quickly, before turning his attention back to Teresa. "Provisions that you made based on, let's say, particular intuitions." Isaiah felt as if he were watching a coded conversation where each word carried meanings he couldn't decipher. "Excuse me," he said, starting to rise. "I think you need privacy to—" "Sit down," Teresa said firmly. "Vincent is right. This concerns you." "I don't understand." Vincent leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Isaiah's face. "Teresa made some alterations to her will a few years ago, very specific alterations." He paused, as if carefully choosing his next words. "One of these alterations mentions a young man named Isaiah." The world seemed to stop. Isaiah felt as if all the voices around him had become a distant buzz, as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. "That's impossible. I've only known Mrs. Teresa for 3 months." "The will was altered in 1997, Vincent said calmly. "I was born in 1999. "Exactly." Vincent leaned back on the sofa, observing the expression of shock on Isaiah's face. "Interesting, isn't it?" Teresa had remained silent during this exchange, but now she leaned forward, her hands finding Isaiah's. "My dear boy," she said softly, "there are things in this world that don't follow common logic, things that reason can't explain." "I don't believe this," Isaiah said, but his voice came out trembling. "It must be a coincidence. Isaiah is a common name." "It is," Vincent agreed, "but the specifications in the will are very detailed." He opened one of the documents and began to read. "A young man named Isaiah, approximately 25 years old, marked by fire, who will take care of Teresa in her final days." His eyes rose to meet Isaiah's. "And who will have eyes as clear as glass and a soul heavy with loss." Isaiah felt the blood drain from his face. These weren't coincidences. They were too specific, too detailed descriptions. "How is this possible?" "Tell him, Teresa," Vincent said softly. Teresa sighed deeply, her hands squeezing Isaiah's. "In 1995, I was on tour in Europe. It was my last major performance before everything started to fall apart." Her voice carried a deep melancholy. "In Paris, I met a man, not a lover," she hastened to clarify, "but someone special. He claimed to be a medium, had visions of the future." "Aunt," Vincent gently interrupted, "perhaps we should—" "No," Teresa said firmly. "He needs to know, he needs to understand." She turned in the direction of Isaiah's voice. "This man Jean-Pierre told me things that at the time seemed absurd. Talked about a boy who would come to me many years later, a boy who would be important not only to me but to the entire Wilson family." Isaiah tried to pull his hands away, but Teresa held them with surprising strength. "Mrs. Teresa, this is madness," she completed. "I thought so too. For years, I tried to forget his words, but they always came back, especially when I started losing my sight. Jean-Pierre had predicted that too." Vincent stood up and began to pace the room, his pale hands in his pockets. "When Teresa told me about these visions, I admit I thought she was starting to lose her lucidity, but she insisted on altering the will, including these specific clauses." He stopped in front of the window, looking at the street. "And then, 3 years later, I received a call from a caregiver agency saying they had found the perfect candidate to care for her, a young man named Isaiah. It could still be coincidence," Isaiah insisted, but his voice didn't carry conviction. "It could be," Vincent agreed, turning to look at him. "But you're 24 years old, were marked by fire, have eyes as clear as glass, and a soul heavy with loss. And there's one more thing Jean-Pierre said about you." "What?" Vincent hesitated, exchanging a look with Teresa. He said you would be the salvation or the downfall of the Wilson lineage, that your presence would change everything. Isaiah rose abruptly, the chair creaking behind him. This is ridiculous. I'm not special. I don't have any mystical power. I can't save or condemn anyone. He ran his hands through his hair, feeling as if he were trapped in a nightmare. I just came to care for an elderly lady. That's it. Is it? Vincent asked, approaching him. Then why are you trembling? Isaiah stopped, realizing Vincent was right. His hands were trembling, his heart racing, his breathing irregular. But it wasn't just because of the revelation about the will. It was because of Vincent's proximity, the way he looked at him, as if he could see straight through his soul. Why are you telling me this? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Because you have the right to know, Teresa replied, and because, according to the will, you are entitled to 30% of the Wilson family inheritance when I die. Isaiah felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. 30%? About $45 million, Vincent added casually. The world began to spin. Isaiah grabbed the back of the armchair, trying not to faint. $45 million. It was more money than he could imagine in 10 lifetimes. I can't accept this. Why not? Vincent asked, genuinely curious. Because I did nothing to deserve it. Because it would be like stealing. Because... Isaiah stopped, realizing he couldn't articulate the real reasons. It was deeper than moral questions. It was fear. Fear that accepting that money meant accepting that his entire life had been orchestrated by forces he didn't understand. Because you were taught that you don't deserve good things, Vincent said softly, and there was something dangerously close to compassion in his voice. That pleasure and wealth are sins, that you should be content with the minimum and be thankful for it. That's not true, isn't it? Vincent came closer, so close that Isaiah could feel the heat of his body. Then tell me, Isaiah, what do you want? Not what you thought you should want, not what your parents told you to want. What do you, Isaiah, really want? The question echoed through the room like a gunshot. Isaiah looked at Teresa, who was sitting in silence, her head tilted as if listening to something only she could hear. He looked at Vincent, who was watching him, with that intensity that made his skin tingle. And then he looked at his own hands, still trembling, still sweating. What did he want? For the first time in his life, Isaiah tried to answer that question honestly. He no longer wanted to live in fear. He no longer wanted to feel like a stranger in his own body. He no longer wanted to deny impulses that arose naturally. He no longer wanted to feel guilty for desires he didn't even fully understand. And looking at Vincent, feeling the magnetic attraction emanating from him, Isaiah realized there was something that frightened him much more than the prospect of an impossible inheritance. He wanted to be touched. He wanted to feel Vincent's hands on his skin, wanted to discover what would happen if he stopped running, if he allowed that tension between them to turn into something concrete. The thought terrified him so much that he took several steps back. I need some air, he said quickly. I'm going for a walk. Isaiah, Teresa called, but he was already heading for the door. Let him go, he heard Vincent say. He needs to process this. Isaiah left the apartment almost running, took the elevator to the ground floor, and went out into the street with no defined destination. His legs automatically took him to the park, where he sat on one of the benches facing the water and tried to put order to his thoughts. $45 million. A prophecy made before he was born. A will that mentioned him specifically. Vincent Wilson looking at him as if he were something precious and dangerous at the same time. And underneath all this confusion, a growing desire he could no longer ignore. He stayed there for 2 hours, watching the birds, trying to understand how his life had become so complicated in just 2 days. When he finally returned to the apartment, he found Vincent alone in the living room reading an old book. Where is Mrs. Teresa? Napping. Vincent closed the book and set it aside. She gets tired after these conversations about the past. Isaiah sat in the armchair across from him, keeping his distance. Why didn't you tell me yesterday about the will? Because I wanted you to get to know me first, as a man, not as a beneficiary of an inheritance. Vincent leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, and I wanted to see how you would react to my presence, how I would react, if you would feel the same thing I felt when I saw you. Isaiah's heart raced. What thing? Vincent studied him for a long moment, as if deciding how much he could reveal. Recognition, he finally said. As if I were looking at someone I'd known for a long time but had forgotten where. That's crazy. It is. Vincent smiled, and there was something wild in that smile. But sometimes madness makes more sense than sanity. They remained silent for a few minutes, the weight of the confession hanging between them. Isaiah felt as if he was standing on the edge of a precipice, knowing that any step could change him forever. "Are you married?" he asked suddenly. "I was. For 7 years." Vincent didn't seem surprised by the question. "Separated 3 years ago." "Children?" "No." Something dark passed through Vincent's eyes. "My ex-wife said I was incapable of loving someone more than my business. She wasn't wrong. And now I'm discovering that maybe she was only half right." Vincent got up and walked to the window. "Maybe I'm incapable of loving some people, but maybe I'm very capable of loving others." The implication behind these words made Isaiah stand up too, nervous energy running through his body. "Vincent, say my name again." "What?" Vincent turned to him, his eyes intense. "Say my name again, the way you just said it." "Vincent," Isaiah repeated, and there was something intimate in the way the word came out of his mouth, as if it were a caress. Like that. Vincent began to approach, his steps slow and deliberate. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to me?" Isaiah shook his head, unable to speak. Vincent was very close now, close enough for him to see the golden flecks in his dark eyes, the small scars that marked his hands, the way his breathing was slightly accelerated. "I've spent the last 20 years building walls around myself," Vincent said, his voice low and husky. "Keeping distance from anything that could weaken me, distract me, make me feel something beyond ambition and control." He raised his hand, his fingers hovering a few centimeters from Isaiah's face. "And then you appeared, with those impossible eyes and that purity that seems like a provocation, and suddenly all my walls are crumbling. I don't want to provoke anyone," Isaiah whispered. "I know." Vincent smiled, and there was tenderness in that smile mixed with something darker. "That's why it's so dangerous. You're not trying to seduce me. You're not playing any game. You just exist, and your existence is destroying 20 years of self-control." Isaiah closed his eyes, trying to block the intensity of Vincent's gaze. "I don't know how to deal with this." "Neither do I." Vincent finally touched his face, his fingers tracing the line of his jaw with a delicacy that contrasted with the strength Isaiah could feel in them. "But maybe we don't need to deal with it. Maybe we just need to feel." When Isaiah opened his eyes, Vincent was so close that their breaths mingled. He could smell the masculine cologne, the heat emanating from his body, the intensity that always accompanied him. And for the first time in his life, instead of running away, he leaned forward. The kiss was inevitable. It started soft, almost hesitant, Vincent's lips just touching his like a question. But when Isaiah didn't pull away, when in fact he responded, by slightly opening his mouth, Vincent deepened the contact. His hands moved to Isaiah's neck, holding him in place, and the kiss became more urgent, more desperate. Isaiah felt as if he were on fire. Each touch of Vincent's lips sent waves of electricity through his body, awakening nerve endings he didn't even know existed. His own hands, which at first had remained motionless at his sides, now moved to Vincent's chest, feeling the firmness of the muscles through his shirt, the accelerated beating of his heart. When they finally separated, both were breathless. Vincent rested his forehead on Isaiah's, his eyes closed, as if trying to compose himself. "Damn," he murmured. "I'm sorry," Isaiah said quickly, trying to pull away. "I shouldn't have." "No." Vincent held him by the shoulders, preventing him from moving away. Don't apologize. Never apologize for kissing me." His eyes opened, and there was something fierce in them. "I was talking about myself, about how you make me lose control." "It's wrong," Isaiah whispered, but his voice didn't carry conviction. "Why? Because your father told you it was? Because some pastor in some church decided that two men touching is a sin?" Vincent came closer again, but this time his proximity was challenging. "Or because you're afraid to discover who you really are when you stop denying yourself?" "I don't know who I am," Isaiah admitted, and there was desperation in his voice. "Throughout my life I knew exactly who I was, the pastor's son, the pure boy, the survivor of the fire. But now I don't know anything anymore." "Good." Vincent smiled, and there was something predatory in that smile. "Knowledge is overrated. Discovery is much more interesting." Before Isaiah could respond, they heard a door opening in the hallway. They quickly moved away from each other, trying to compose their expressions, when Teresa appeared in the living room, leaning on her cane. "You two are making a lot of noise," she said, but there was an amused smile on her lips. "An old lady needs her rest." "Sorry, Aunt," Vincent said, his voice returning to the formal tone he had used earlier. Teresa headed for her favorite armchair, but stopped halfway, her head tilted as if listening to something. "The air has changed," she said thoughtfully. "How so?" Isaiah asked. "It's heavier, electrically charged." She smiled to herself. "Jean-Pierre said this would happen, that when you two finally met, even the air around would change." Vincent and Isaiah exchanged a loaded look. "Aunt," Vincent said carefully, "you didn't mention that Jean-Pierre had predicted something about us too, specifically." "Didn't I?" Teresa feigned innocence. "How forgetful of me." She sat in her armchair, hands crossed in her lap. "He said many things about you, that you would meet, that you would recognize each other, that you would change each other in irreversible ways." Her expression became more serious, but he also said the path wouldn't be easy, that there would be obstacles, painful revelations, difficult choices. "What kind of revelations?" Isaiah asked, but part of him already feared the answer. "Jean-Pierre wasn't specific about the details," Teresa replied. "He spoke in symbols, in metaphors, but he said your past was more connected than you would imagine, and that the truth, when it came to light, would test everything you felt for each other." Vincent became very quiet, a somber expression crossing his face. "What kind of connection?" "I don't know," Teresa admitted, "but I know there are things I haven't told you, things you might not be ready to hear." "Like what?" Isaiah insisted. Teresa hesitated as if carefully weighing her words. "There are documents," she finally said. "Letters, photographs, family records I've kept over the years, things that might explain not only why you were predicted in the will, Isaiah, but why your family, why what happened to your parents might not have been as accidental as you think." The blood froze in Isaiah's veins. "What do you mean by that?" "Tomorrow," Teresa said firmly. "Today there have been enough revelations. Tomorrow I'll show you the documents and you can draw your own conclusions." Vincent rose abruptly. "Aunt, if there's something that can help Isaiah understand what happened to his family." "Tomorrow, Vincent." Her voice didn't allow for discussion. "Some truths need to be digested gradually, and you two have more immediate things to resolve." She gestured vaguely between them, and Isaiah felt his face heat up when he realized she was referring to the obvious tension that still hung between him and Vincent. "I need to go," Vincent said suddenly, picking up his leather folder. "I have a video conference with investors in Hong Kong in an hour." He headed for the door but stopped in front of Isaiah, standing close enough to whisper, "This isn't over. Not the kiss, not the conversation, not what's happening between us." "Vincent, think about what I said, about discoveries." His eyes moved quickly to Isaiah's lips before returning to his eyes. "And about what you really want." After he left, Isaiah stood in the middle of the living room, touching his lips still sensitive from the kiss. Teresa remained silent for a few minutes before speaking. "He's right, you know," she said softly, "about you denying yourself, about being afraid to want. "Mrs. Teresa." "My dear boy," she interrupted, "I've lived 88 years in this world. I've seen 2 world wars, 3 revolutions, 5 presidents, countless social changes, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that life is too short to waste it on fear." Isaiah sat on the sofa where Vincent had been, still able to feel the residual heat of his body in the upholstery. "And if I don't know how to stop being afraid?" "Then learn," Teresa said simply. "With Vincent, he may be arrogant, controlling, sometimes ruthless in business, but he's not cruel. And there's something in him that recognizes something in you, just as there's something in you that recognizes something in him. Do you really believe in these prophecies, in these predictions about destiny?" Teresa tilted her head thoughtfully. "I believe there are forces in this world that we don't fully understand. I believe some people are born to meet each other, that some stories begin long before the protagonists meet." She smiled. "But mainly, I believe in what I feel. And when I see you 2 together, I feel that something is being completed, as if pieces of a puzzle were finally finding their correct places." That night Isaiah again couldn't sleep, but this time it wasn't just anxiety that kept him awake. It was anticipation. It was the memory of Vincent's kiss, the feeling of his hands on his face, the promise in his voice when he said that this wasn't over. For the first time in his life, Isaiah allowed himself to imagine what might happen if he stopped running. If he accepted not only the impossible inheritance, but also the impossible attraction he felt for Vincent. If he discovered who he really was, when all the layers of denial and fear were removed. The prospect terrified and excited him in equal measure. And tomorrow, Teresa would show him documents that could change everything he thought he knew about his own life, about his parents' death, about why destiny had brought him here. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine what it would be like to wake up without fear, without guilt, without the constant feeling that he was doing something wrong just by existing. For the first time, the image that came to his mind didn't terrify him. It left him hopeful. Isaiah woke to the sound of rain hitting the window. He had slept only 2 hours, but his dreams had been more vivid than reality. Vincent appeared in them constantly, sometimes as the man he had kissed the day before, sometimes as a shadowy figure in the flames of the fire that had killed his parents. He woke up several times during the early morning with his heart racing, not knowing if it was desire or terror that made him sweat coldly. Teresa was already awake when he left the room, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea in her hands. She seemed different today, more fragile somehow, as if carrying all those secrets for so long had finally begun to take its toll. "Good morning, my dear," she said when she heard him approach. "Did you sleep well?" "More or less," Isaiah began, to prepare her breakfast, checking the medications, organizing the vitamins in the small glass container she preferred. "And you, Mum?" "The dead wouldn't let me sleep," she replied, and there was something in her voice that made Isaiah stop what he was doing. "What do you mean?" Teresa smiled, but there was no humor in that smile. "It's just an expression, Isaiah. But sometimes when you carry secrets for too long, they begin to take on a life of their own. They begin to whisper in your ears during the early morning, demanding that you set them free." Before Isaiah could ask what she meant, the intercom rang. Vincent had arrived earlier than expected, and when Isaiah opened the door, he noticed that he too seemed to have slept little. His eyes were slightly red, his stubble more visible, and there was a tension in his shoulders that wasn't there the day before. "I thought it would be better to come early," Vincent said, passing by Isaiah without looking at him directly. "Before I lost my courage." "Courage for what?" Vincent turned, and when his eyes finally met Isaiah's, there was something vulnerable in them, something that completely contrasted with the dominating confidence he always projected. To hear what she has to tell us, to discover truths that might be better left buried. Teresa was waiting for them in the living room, an old wooden box positioned on her side table. The box looked decades old, perhaps a century, and was covered with intricate carvings that resembled symbols Isaiah couldn't identify. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to the sofa. "What I'm going to show you today will change how you see your own lives, especially you, Isaiah." Vincent sat first, leaving enough space between him and Isaiah so they wouldn't touch, but close enough for Isaiah to feel the heat of his body. The tension from the kiss the day before still hung between them, an electric energy that made the air seem charged. "This box," Teresa began, her hands caressing the carved surface, "belonged to my grandmother, who in turn inherited it from her grandmother. Inside are documents that our family has kept for over 100 years, documents that tell a story that was never officially recorded." She opened the box slowly, revealing yellowed papers, old photographs, letters tied with faded ribbons. The smell of old paper and lost time escaped from it like a sigh. "The Wilson family wasn't always rich," Teresa said, removing a black and white photograph. "My great-grandfather, Joseph Wilson, was just a rancher in West Virginia in the late Sioux to 19th century. But he had something that set him apart from other men in the region, an obsession with gold and a willingness to do anything to find it." She passed the photograph to Vincent, who looked at it carefully before showing it to Isaiah. The image showed a stern-looking man, standing in front of a simple wooden house surrounded by other men with mining tools. "Joseph formed a partnership with another man from the region," Teresa continued, removing more documents from the box. "An evangelical pastor named Ezekiel Thompson." Isaiah's blood froze. "Thompson! Your great-grandfather Isaiah." Teresa turned in the direction of his voice, her blind eyes seeming to see right through him. "Says Ezekiel Thompson, who preached during the week and looked for gold on weekends." Vincent leaned forward, his attention completely focused. "They worked together?" "For 5 years," Teresa confirmed, removing a yellowed letter from the box. "Joseph financed the expeditions. Ezekiel knew the region like no one else. They discovered 3 very productive gold veins between 1895 and 1900. They should have split the profits 50-50. "Should have?" Isaiah repeated, though he already suspected the answer. "In 1901, Ezekiel disappeared." Teresa carefully unfolded the letter. "He took with him maps, information about other possible veins, and approximately half the gold they had extracted together. Joseph never saw him again." Isaiah felt as if the ground had opened up beneath his feet. "My great-grandfather stole from yours." "Technically, he took only what he believed to be his part," Teresa said diplomatically. "But there's more." She removed another document, this one more formal, with official seals. Before disappearing, Ezekiel registered one of the mines in his own name, a mine that Joseph believed belonged to both of them. Vincent took the document and examined it carefully. "This is a property deed, dated September 1901. His eyes moved quickly over the text. "Ezekiel Thompson, legal owner of the St. Francis mine located in the region of—" He stopped, looking at Isaiah. "In the region where you were born." "That explains why Ezekiel moved to that area," Teresa said, "and why the Thompson family settled there. He was protecting his investment." Isaiah rose abruptly, beginning to pace the room. His mind was racing, trying to process the implications of what he was hearing. "So my family built their life with gold stolen from your family." "Not stolen," Vincent said carefully. "Technically, your great-grandfather was within his legal rights. But morally it's more complicated," Teresa admitted. "But it didn't end in 1901, Isaiah. The story continues." She removed a series of letters from the box, all tied with a faded red ribbon. Over the following years, Joseph tried several times to contact Ezekiel. He wanted to understand why he had left, wanted to resolve the situation. These are the letters he wrote. Vincent untied the ribbon and began to read. The first letter aloud. "Ezekiel, my friend and brother, I do not understand your sudden departure. We were partners. We shared not only the work but also the dreams. If I committed some error, if I said something that offended you, I ask that you forgive me and return so we can talk." Joseph never received a response, Teresa said. For 20 years he wrote letters that were never answered. And then in 1921, he discovered something that changed everything. She removed a yellowed newspaper clipping, carefully preserved between 2 sheets of tracing paper. Ezekiel Thompson had died in 1918, 3 years after Joseph had begun writing the letters. Isaiah stopped pacing, How did he die? Yellow fever, according to the newspaper. But... Teresa hesitated, as if still deciding how much to reveal. There are rumors that it wasn't a natural death. What kind of rumors? Vincent asked, but his voice was tenser now. Jean-Pierre mentioned something about this during our conversation in Paris. He said there was violence in the past of our families, blood spilled that had not yet been expiated. Teresa leaned back, in her armchair, suddenly looking older. He was very specific. He said Ezekiel Thompson didn't die of yellow fever, but of fire. The silence that followed was deafening. Isaiah felt as if all the pieces of a macabre puzzle were beginning to fit together, forming an image he didn't want to see. Fire, he repeated slowly. Like your parents, Vincent said, and there was something dark in his voice. Christ, Teresa, are you suggesting that... I'm not suggesting anything, she said firmly. I'm just sharing information I've kept for decades. Her expression became more serious. But Jean-Pierre was very clear about one thing. He said the debts between our families would only be settled when a Thompson forgave a Wilson, and that this would only happen when love overcame resentment. Isaiah sat heavily on the sofa, his legs no longer able to support his weight. Are you saying, my parents died because of a family feud that started over 100 years ago? We're saying that maybe it wasn't a coincidence, Vincent said gently, that maybe your family was targeted. Targeted by whom? Who in the Wilson family would still care about something that happened so long ago? Vincent and Teresa exchanged a look that Isaiah couldn't interpret. Isaiah, Vincent said carefully, there are members of our family who take matters of honor and ancestral debts very seriously. Like who? My father, mainly. Vincent ran his hands through his hair, suddenly looking exhausted. Alexander Wilson never forgot any offense, never forgave any betrayal. He grew up hearing stories about how the Thompsons stole gold from our family, how Ezekiel betrayed Joseph's trust. Is your father still alive? Died 5 years ago, Vincent replied. But before dying, he made me swear that I would do justice for the Thompson betrayal. Isaiah's world began to spin. And did you do justice? Vincent remained silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on his own hands. When he finally looked at Isaiah, there was pain and something that seemed like guilt in his expression. I hired a private investigator to find descendants of the Thompson family in 2021, he admitted. I just wanted to know where they were, what they did. I had no specific plans for revenge. Revenge, Isaiah repeated, the word coming out of his mouth like a blasphemy. The investigator found your family first, Vincent continued, his voice getting lower. Ezekiel Thompson, your father, pastor of the Baptist Church of Riverside, married to Mary Thompson, 3 children, including you. Isaiah rose again, this time with fury running through his veins. You knew who I was before. You met me? No. Vincent stood too, his hands extended as if he wanted to touch Isaiah but didn't dare. I knew about your family, but I didn't know about you specifically. When Teresa called me saying she had found the boy from the prophecy, a young man named Isaiah, who would be perfect to care for her, I thought it was a coincidence. And when did you discover it wasn't? Vincent didn't respond immediately, and his hesitation was answer enough. My God, Isaiah murmured, moving away from him. You knew all along. Not all along, Vincent said desperately. On the first day when we met, I still thought it could be a coincidence, but when you told me about the fire, about how your parents died, I knew. And yet you kissed me knowing that maybe your family was responsible for my parents' death. Isaiah, I didn't know if my family had anything to do with the fire, Vincent said, approaching him. I still don't know. My father was vindictive, but he died before the fire happened. But he could have left instructions, could have asked someone to finish what he had started. Vincent stopped, a somber expression crossing his face. There is someone who could have done this. Who? My older brother, Richard. Vincent sat heavily, his hands covering his face. He was always obsessed with the family stories, with honor and revenge. When our father died, Richard saw himself as the guardian of the Wilson legacy. Teresa, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke. Richard was here 2 years ago, at the end of 2022. He said he was coming to say goodbye to me because he was leaving for an important mission. What kind of mission? Isaiah asked, but he already suspected the answer. He wasn't specific, but he said he would finally do justice for the Thompson betrayal, that our father could rest in peace. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain hitting the windows. Isaiah sat down slowly, trying to process everything he had heard. His entire life had been a lie. His parents hadn't died in a tragic accident. They had been murdered because of a century-old family feud he didn't even know existed. And Vincent knew all this and yet had allowed something to develop between them. "I need to leave," Isaiah said suddenly, standing up. "I can't stay here." Isaiah. Wait, Vincent stood too, trying to reach him. "We can discover the truth. We can find Richard, make him confess." "And then what?" Isaiah turned to him, tears of anger burning his eyes. "Will that bring my parents back? Will that erase the fact that I fell in love with the man whose family destroyed mine?" "You fell in love with me?" Vincent asked, and there was something devastatingly vulnerable in his voice. The question caught Isaiah completely off guard. He had said that without thinking, but now that the words were in the air, he couldn't deny them. Yes, he had fallen in love. In 2 days, against all logic and all his upbringing, he had fallen in love with Vincent Wilson. And that made everything infinitely worse. "It doesn't matter," he said, but his voice was trembling. "It can't matter now." "It matters to me," Vincent said, approaching him. "It matters more than anything else. How can you say that? How can it matter when you knew who I was and didn't tell me?" "Because I was afraid," Vincent exploded, his own anger finally coming to the surface. "Afraid that if you knew the truth from the beginning, you would never give me a chance. Afraid that you would look at me as if I were a monster before even getting to know me." "And now I know that you were right," Isaiah said coldly. "You should have told me." Vincent stopped, something in his face closing. "And you? Should you have told me that you felt something for me before I had to wrench that confession from you? That's different. Is it? Or are we both cowards when it comes to feelings?" Teresa hit her cane on the floor hard, the sound echoing through the room and interrupting the argument. "Stop this immediately," she said with authority. "You two are acting like squabbling children instead of adult men capable of solving problems." "Mrs. Teresa," Isaiah began. "Don't interrupt me," she said firmly. "Do you want to know the complete truth? Then sit down and listen to me, because there's one more thing I need to tell you, and after that you can decide what to do with your lives." Reluctantly, both sat down, keeping their distance from each other. "Jean-Pierre told me there would be 3 revelations," Teresa said, removing the last set of documents from the box. "The first was about the prophecy and the will. The second was about the past of your families. The third," she hesitated, holding the papers against her chest, "the third is about what really happened to your parents, Isaiah." "What do you mean?" "Richard Wilson didn't kill your parents," she said. Simply, the world stopped. Isaiah felt as if he had been struck by lightning. "How can you know that?" "Because I know who did," Teresa answered, her voice laden with deep sadness. "And why?" Vincent leaned forward, his attention completely focused. "Who?" Teresa unfolded the last document, a letter written on modern paper dated just 2 years earlier. "Your father, Isaiah, Pastor Ezekiel Thompson, killed his own parents." The silence that followed was absolute. Isaiah felt as if he couldn't breathe, as if all the oxygen had been sucked from the room. "That's impossible," he finally managed to say. "My father died in the fire." "No," Teresa said gently. "Your father started the fire, and then he fled, leaving you to believe he had died." She handed him the letter, and with trembling hands, Isaiah unfolded it. It was handwritten. In handwriting he immediately recognized as his father's. "To whoever finds this letter, my name is Ezekiel Thompson, and I killed my wife. Not out of hatred, but out of love. Mary discovered the truth about our past, about the gold that our family stole from the Wilsons over 100 years ago. She wanted to return everything, wanted to look for the descendants of the Wilson family and confess our sins. I couldn't allow that. Our entire life was built on this lie, and I couldn't let her destroy it. I started the fire to make it look accidental. My son Isaiah escaped, thank God. He doesn't know the truth, and it's better that way. He is innocent. I am not. May God forgive me, but I cannot live with this guilt. I am going far away, where I will never cause pain to anyone again. Isaiah, if you ever read this, know that I loved you and your mother more than life itself. But sometimes love is not enough to cleanse the sins of the past. The letter fell from Isaiah's hands, floating, to the floor like a dry leaf. He couldn't process what he had read. His father, the man who had taught him about morality and virtue, had killed his own wife, had started the fire, had fled like a coward, leaving Isaiah to believe he was an orphan. "How did you get this letter?" Vincent asked, his voice tense. "Richard brought it to me 2 years ago," Teresa replied. He had hired investigators to find evidence of the Thompson family's crimes. Instead, he found evidence that Ezekiel had killed his own wife because of ancestral guilt. "Where is my father now?" Isaiah asked, his voice coming out as a whisper. "We don't know," Teresa admitted. "Richard tried to find him, but he disappeared completely, as if he had evaporated." Isaiah rose slowly, his trembling legs barely able to support his weight. His entire world had crumbled in a matter of minutes. His family hadn't been the victim of an ancestral revenge. His own father had been the murderer. And he had spent 2 years mourning a man who was a liar and a coward. "I need to get out of here," he said, heading for the door. "Isaiah," Vincent called him, rising too. "Don't leave like this." "Why? To hear more lies? To discover more terrible secrets about my life?" Isaiah turned to him, tears now freely running down his face. "You want me to stay after discovering that my entire life was built on lies and blood?" "I want you to stay because I love you," Vincent said desperately, "because nothing we discovered today changes what I feel for you." "It changes everything for me," Isaiah replied, opening the door. "It changes who I am, who I thought I was, what I believed about my own life." "You're still the same person I met," Vincent said, approaching the door. "Still the man I fell in love with." "No," Isaiah shook his head. "I am the son of a murderer. I carry the blood of criminals and thieves. You should stay away from me." "Isaiah, please." But Isaiah had already left, running to the elevator before Vincent could follow him. When the doors closed, the last thing he saw was Vincent standing in the hallway, a devastated expression on his face. Isaiah went down to the lobby and out into the rain with no defined destination. He walked the streets of Manhattan for hours, soaked, lost, trying to understand how his life had become so unrecognizable in such a short time. Everything he thought he knew about himself was a lie. His parents, his childhood, his identity, all built on a foundation of crimes and guilt. And Vincent, who had fallen in love with him even knowing their families were connected by blood and betrayal. Vincent, who had kissed him, even suspecting they might be natural enemies. Did that make the love between them impossible or inevitable? When he finally stopped walking, he discovered he was in Central Park. The rain had diminished to a fine drizzle, and some people were beginning to appear on the paths. He sat on one of the benches facing the water, watching the ducks, trying to find some kind of peace in the rhythmic movement of the water. His phone rang. It was Vincent. Isaiah looked at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Where are you?" Vincent's voice was tense, worried. "In the park." "Which park?" "New York has hundreds of parks." "Central Park, near the boathouse. I'll be there in 15 minutes. "Vincent, I don't want—" 15 minutes? Vincent repeated and hung up. Isaiah sat looking at the phone, part of him wanting to leave before Vincent arrived, part of him knowing they needed to talk, that they needed to resolve what was between them before it was too late. When Vincent appeared, running along the path with his hair wet from the rain, Isaiah felt his heart race. Even after everything he had discovered, even knowing their story was infinitely more complicated than he had imagined, he still felt that magnetic attraction whenever he looked at Vincent. "You're soaked," Vincent said, sitting next to him on the bench. "You'll get sick." I don't care. Vincent took off his blazer and placed it over Isaiah's shoulders, his hands lingering longer than necessary on the contact. I care. They remained silent for a few minutes, watching the ducks. Finally, Vincent spoke. Nothing we discovered today changes what I feel for you, he said softly. If anything, it makes me love you even more. How can you say that? Because now I understand why you are the way you are, why you carry so much guilt, so much pain, why you were raised to deny yourself everything good in life. Vincent turned to look at him. You've spent your entire life paying for crimes you didn't commit, carrying guilt that wasn't yours. And what if it's hereditary? What if I have the same darkness my father had? Do you think you do? Isaiah thought about all the times he had felt anger, desire, impulses that his religious upbringing told him were sinful. Sometimes I think dark things. Like what? Like when I look at you and I want... Isaiah stopped, his face heating up. Want what? I want to possess you. I want you to possess me. I want to forget everything. Morality, religion, family, past, and just feel. Isaiah finally looked at Vincent. Does that make me like my father? Vincent smiled, and there was something wild in that smile. That makes you human, makes you a man, makes you mine. Vincent. Marry me. The words came out so casually that Isaiah took a few seconds to process what he had heard. What? Marry me, Vincent repeated, this time turning completely to him. Forget the past, forget the families, forget everything we discovered today. Marry me and let's build our own story. You've gone crazy? We've known each other for 2 days. And? In 2 days you've turned my world upside down. In 2 days you've made me feel things I haven't felt in decades. In 2 days you've become the most important person in my life. Vincent took his hands, holding them firmly. Isaiah, I'm 56 years old. I've lived enough to know when something is real, and this is real. It's madness. It's love. Isaiah looked into Vincent's eyes and saw absolute sincerity there. He saw love, desire, determination. He saw a future that was both terrifying and seductive. What if it doesn't work out? What if it does? The question hung between them like a promise. Isaiah thought about everything he had lost, his parents, his faith, his identity, and he thought about everything he could gain, love, freedom, a new life built on his own. Terms. I need time to think, he finally said. How much time? I don't know, a few days, maybe a week. Vincent nodded, though it was obvious he wanted an immediate answer. And while you think, will you go back to take care of Teresa? Yes, Isaiah said. She needs me, and I need to better understand this whole story. There's one more thing, Vincent said hesitantly, about Richard. What? He returned to the States last week. Teresa called me last night to warn me. He wants to meet you. Isaiah felt a shiver of fear run down his spine. Why? I don't know, but knowing my brother, he has some plan, and usually Richard's plans don't end well for anyone. Do you think he's dangerous? Vincent hesitated before answering. I think he's obsessive. And obsessive men do unpredictable things when confronted with situations they can't control. Like me. Like you. Isaiah stood up, Vincent doing the same. They stood facing each other, the sexual tension that always accompanied them now mixed with uncertainty and fear. Isaiah, Vincent said softly, regardless of what you decide, about us, about marriage, about the future, I want you to know that you've changed my life, that you've reminded me what it's like to feel something real. You've changed mine too, Isaiah admitted. Even with all this confusion, even with all the secrets and lies, you've made me feel alive for the first time. Vincent came closer, and when his hands touched Isaiah's face, he didn't pull away. The kiss that followed was different from the first. It was desperate, full of uncertainty and promises not made. It was the kiss of two men who knew they were on the verge of something that would change their lives forever, for better or worse. When they separated, Both were breathing heavily. 1 week, Vincent said. 1 week, Isaiah agreed. And then they parted, each walking in a different direction, both knowing that the next time they met everything would have changed. The next 3 days passed in a fog of forced routine and growing tension. Isaiah returned to caring for Teresa, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Each gesture, each word, each silence carried the weight of the revelations that had shaken his life. Teresa perceived his agitation, but respected his space, limiting herself to gentle comments about the weather or simple requests related to her care. Vincent didn't appear during those 3 days, as he had promised, but his absence was as present as his presence had been. Isaiah found himself looking out the window, expecting to see the black Porsche park on the street, found himself stopping in front of the bathroom mirror, imagining what it would be like to wake up next to that man every morning. The marriage proposal echoed in his mind constantly, a tempting invitation to a life he didn't even know he could want. On the morning of the 4th day, Isaiah woke to the sound of the intercom ringing insistently. It was only 6:30 too, early for Vincent, or any visit Teresa might be expecting. When he answered the doorman, a voice he didn't recognize simply said, "Richard Wilson, to see Isaiah Thompson." The blood froze in his veins. Richard, Vincent's brother. The man who had spent years obsessed with revenge against the Thompson family. "He can come up," Isaiah said, though his voice came out trembling. He needed to face this, needed to understand what kind of man Richard Wilson was and what he wanted. When the elevator door opened on the 12th floor, Isaiah saw a man who was clearly Vincent's brother, but in a distorted way. Richard had the same imposing height, the same solid physical structure, but where Vincent radiated magnetic confidence, Richard's eyes were lighter than Vincent's, almost grey, and there was an intensity in them that made Isaiah feel like an insect being studied under a magnifying glass. "Isaiah Thompson," Richard said, stopping in the hallway, without making any move to enter the apartment. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, without any detail that would humanize him, no imperfection that would suggest vulnerability. "Finally, we meet." "Mr. Wilson." Isaiah kept the door only slightly ajar, instinctively knowing he didn't want this man inside the apartment where Teresa was sleeping. "It's very early for a visit." "I'm an early riser," Richard replied, a cold smile touching his lips, "and I believe our conversation can't wait." "Our conversation?" "About your future. About your options," Richard gestured to the hallway. "We can talk here, but I'm sure the neighbors wouldn't appreciate being awakened." Reluctantly, Isaiah opened the door and let Richard in. The man moved through the living room as if he owned the place, his eyes cataloguing every detail, every object, as if assessing the value of everything. "Where is Teresa?" "Sleeping, and I prefer she stay that way." Isaiah positioned himself between Richard and the hallway that led to the bedrooms. "What do you want?" Richard sat on the sofa without being invited, crossing his legs with studied elegance. "I want to talk about my aunt's will, about your inheritance." "It's not my inheritance. I didn't ask for anything." "Ah, but it is yours, legally and officially." Richard took some papers from inside his blazer. $45 million, a considerable sum for someone who until a week ago was earning minimum wage. The condescending tone in Richard's voice made irritation grow in Isaiah's chest. "And I'd like to make a deal with you." "What kind of deal?" Richard unfolded the papers, revealing complex legal documents. "You sign a waiver to the inheritance. I pay you $5 million in cash. No taxes, no complications. You get enough money for a comfortable life. I get the assets that rightfully belong to the Wilson family." Isaiah studied Richard's face, looking for signs that this was a negotiation or a disguised threat. "And if I refuse?" "Why would you refuse? $5 million is much more money than you ever imagined having." "That doesn't answer my question. What happens if I refuse?" Richard leaned forward, and when he smiled, there was no warmth in his expression. "Then I'll have to explore other options to resolve this situation." "What kind of options?" "Well, for example, I could investigate more deeply into your parents' death." Look for evidence that perhaps it wasn't an accident. Richard paused, observing Isaiah's reaction. Or I could investigate where your father is now. Ezekiel Thompson, whom everyone thinks is dead, but who actually fled after murdering his own wife. Isaiah's heart stopped. You know where he is? I do. Richard smiled again, this time with genuine satisfaction. And I can ensure you never find him, or I can arrange a very emotional reunion between father and son, depending on your choices. You're blackmailing me. I'm offering options, $5 million and you never hear from the Wilson family again, or $45 million and a life full of complications. Isaiah stood up, nervous energy running through his body. Richard was using his father as bait, manipulating the deepest pain he carried. You're despicable. I'm practical. Richard stood up too, smoothing his suit. And I'm patient. You have 24 hours to decide. And if I tell Vincent about all this, feel free. Richard headed for the door but stopped and turned. But remember that my brother is a romantic. He believes in happy endings, in love that conquers all. I'm a realist. I believe some stories don't have happy endings. After Richard left, Isaiah stood in the living room for long minutes, trying to process what had happened. Blackmail, manipulation, veiled threats, and beneath it all, the most disturbing information: his father was alive. He's dangerous, a voice said behind him. Isaiah turned and saw Teresa standing at the entrance to the hallway, leaning on her cane. Richard has always been the darkest part of the Wilson family. Did you hear everything? Enough. She approached him, her steps careful but determined. And I know you're thinking of accepting his proposal. $5 million is a lot of money. I could start a new life away from all this. Running from who you really are? Denying what you feel for Vincent? Teresa shook her head. That's not a new life, Isaiah. It's a golden prison. And staying here isn't? Living with the knowledge that my family destroyed yours? That my father is a murderer? That I carry the blood of criminals? You carry the blood of human beings, Teresa said firmly. Fallible, complicated, capable of great mistakes and great loves. She came closer, her hands finding Isaiah's. Jean-Pierre told me something I never told you. He said you would be the redemption of the Thompson lineage, that through your love, the sins of the past would be forgiven. Love? For Vincent. The man who is completely lost for you. Teresa smiled. Do you think he doesn't know you're here, suffering, making a decision that will affect the rest of your lives? He's been in the parking lot for 2 hours, pacing back and forth, wanting to come up but respecting the space you asked for. Isaiah ran to the window and looked down. There was Vincent, walking beside his car, phone in hand, hair disheveled, as if he had run his hands through it many times. Even from a distance, Isaiah could see the tension in his shoulders, the anxiety in his movements. He loves you, Teresa said softly, and you love him. Shouldn't that be enough? What if Richard fulfills his threats? What if he hurts Vincent because of me? Vincent can take care of himself. He didn't build an empire by being a coward. Teresa headed for her favorite armchair. But you need to decide what kind of man you want to be, the kind who runs when things get difficult, or the kind who fights for what he loves. Isaiah watched Vincent for a few more minutes before making his decision. He grabbed the apartment keys and went down to the parking lot. Vincent saw him approaching and stopped, walking, his expression changing from anxiety to relief, and then to something that looked like cautious hope. "Are you okay?" were Vincent's first words. "I saw Richard leave the building an hour ago. I was almost coming up to check if—" "He made me a proposal," Isaiah interrupted him. $5 million to renounce the inheritance. Vincent's face closed. And? He told me he knows where my father is, that he can arrange a meeting or ensure I never find him, depending on my choice. Vincent clenched his fists, muscles tense under his shirt. Son of a bitch, he's using your father as leverage. He is. Isaiah came closer, noticing the lines of tension around Vincent's eyes, the signs that he too hadn't slept well. And he gave me 24 hours to decide. What are you going to do? Isaiah looked into Vincent's eyes, seeing love, fear, hope, and determination mixed there. I'm going to accept your proposal. Which proposal? Marriage. The word came out more naturally than Isaiah had expected. If the offer is still on the table. Vincent remained completely still for a moment, as if he couldn't believe what he had heard. Are you sure? I'm sure that I love you. I'm sure I want to discover who I can be by your side. I'm sure I don't want to run anymore. Isaiah took another step, now close enough to touch Vincent. I'm not sure about much beyond that, but maybe that's enough. Vincent didn't respond with words. Instead, he pulled Isaiah into his arms and kissed him with an intensity that made his knees shake. It was a kiss that spoke of relief, gratitude, promise, and accumulated desire. When they finally separated, both were breathing heavily. Marry me today, Vincent said against his lips. Today. Today, now. Before Richard tries something, before you change your mind, before the world has a chance to interfere again. Vincent held Isaiah's face between his hands. I know a judge who can perform the civil ceremony in 2 hours. Vincent, this is madness, mice. It's love, Vincent corrected him. It's two men who found each other against all odds and refused to let the past destroy their future. Isaiah looked at this man who had turned his life upside down in less than a week. Vincent Wilson, powerful millionaire, reduced to a vulnerable man by love. And somehow, this made him seem even stronger, not weaker. All right, Isaiah said, and felt as if he were jumping off a cliff. Let's get married. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Vincent made calls, organized documents, obtained the necessary licenses with an efficiency that only money and influence could provide. Isaiah returned to the apartment to change and explain the situation to Teresa, who received the news with a satisfied smile and an order for him to wear the navy blue suit she had bought for him weeks earlier for special occasions. How did you know? Isaiah asked while adjusting his tie in the mirror. Jean-Pierre, she answered simply. He said you would marry quickly, impulsively, but that it would be lasting. And if he's wrong about this too? Then you'll discover, together. Teresa approached him, her hands adjusting his tie with the practice of decades. But I don't think he's wrong. You two were made for each other, Isaiah. Even if it took more than 100 years for you to meet. The ceremony took place in the office of Judge Marcus Farrell, a man in his 60s, who clearly owed favors to Vincent. It was simple, direct, without romantic flourishes or elaborate declarations. Isaiah said, yes, looking into Vincent's eyes and seeing his own future reflected there. Vincent said yes with a firm voice that left no doubt about his determination. When the judge declared them husbands, Vincent kissed Isaiah with a tenderness that contrasted with the urgency that had brought them there. It was the kiss of a man who finally had something worth protecting. And now? Isaiah asked when they left the courthouse. Now we're going home, Vincent said, intertwining their fingers. To our home. Our home? I bought a house in the Hamptons last week. Ocean view, large garden, 5 bedrooms. Vincent smiled with a shyness that Isaiah had never seen in him before. I was hoping you would agree to move in with me. You were sure I would say yes. I was hopeful. The house was stunning. A modern mansion with large glass windows, spacious terraces, and a pool that seemed to merge with the ocean in the background. Isaiah walked through the rooms in silence, trying to believe that this was real, that he had a right to this luxury, this beauty. You can change anything, Vincent said, following him. Decoration, furniture, colors. I want you to feel at home. I do feel at home, Isaiah admitted, stopping in front of the window in the master bedroom. And that scares me. Why? Because it's too easy to get used to good things. And when you lose them, it hurts more. Vincent approached from behind, his arms encircling Isaiah's waist. You're not going to lose me, he murmured against his neck. Not if I can help it. Isaiah leaned against Vincent's chest, feeling the solidity of his body, the firmness of his arms around him. For the first time in years, he felt safe, protected, loved. And Richard? He won't give up just because we got married. Richard is my problem now, Vincent said, his hands moving to Isaiah's abdomen, touching over his shirt. You're my husband. That means you're under my protection. Your protection. Vincent turned him in his arms, his dark eyes intense. It means that anyone who wants to hurt you will have to go through me first. His hands moved to Isaiah's face, thumbs tracing his cheekbones. And I'm not as gentle as I seem when it comes to protecting what's mine. There was something predatory in Vincent's voice that made something contract in Isaiah's stomach. Not fear, but excitement, recognition. This was the powerful man who had built an empire, who was feared and respected in the business world, and now he was using all that strength to protect Isaiah. I am yours? Isaiah asked, his voice coming out hoarser than he intended. Completely, Vincent replied, coming closer until their breaths mingled. Just as I am yours. The kiss that followed was different from all the previous ones. It was possessive, urgent, laden with promises and claims. Vincent's hands moved to the buttons of Isaiah's shirt, opening them one by one with a deliberate slowness that made his skin prickle. Vincent, Isaiah whispered, but didn't know if he was asking him to stop or continue. Shh, Vincent murmured against his lips. Let me take care of you. And then Vincent's hands were on his skin, warm and sure, exploring his chest, his shoulders, his neck. Isaiah felt as if he were on fire, each touch sending waves of electricity through his body. He had never been touched like this, with desire and reverence mixed, as if he were something precious and dangerous at the same time. When Vincent took him to bed, Isaiah didn't protest. When he removed his clothes with infinite patience, kissing every inch of revealed skin, Isaiah could only surrender to the sensation. And when they finally became one, Isaiah understood why he had spent his entire life denying himself these sensations, because nothing could have prepared him for the intensity of what he felt in Vincent's arms. Later, lying naked under the silk sheets, Isaiah's body still trembling with the echoes of pleasure, Vincent traced the scar on his shoulder with his fingertips. This mark, he said softly, was for me to find you, for me to know you were mine. I don't believe in destiny, Isaiah murmured, sleepy. No? Vincent smiled, gently kissing the scar. Then how? Do you explain all this? How do you explain the prophecy, the will, the fact that we found each other against all odds? Coincidence? Luck? Madness? Love, Vincent corrected, pulling him closer. Love that transcends time, families, logic. Isaiah was almost falling asleep when his phone rang. Vincent mumbled something about turning off the device, but Isaiah recognized the specific ringtone he had programmed for emergencies. It's Teresa, he said, picking up the phone. Hello? Isaiah? Teresa's voice was tense, frightened. You need to come here, now. What happened? Richard came back, and he brought someone with him. The blood froze in Isaiah's veins. Who? Your father. The phone almost fell from Isaiah's hands. Ezekiel Thompson, the man who had killed his own wife and left his son believing he was an orphan, was in Teresa's apartment, alive, real, waiting for him. We're coming, Isaiah said, already getting out of bed. Isaiah, Teresa said before he could hang up, be careful. Something is very wrong here. Richard is different. And your father, he's not the man you remember. The call ended, leaving Isaiah and Vincent in silence in the dark room. Outside, the ocean continued its eternal waves, indifferent to the human drama unfolding in the house overlooking its waters. You don't have to go, Vincent said, getting up too. We can call the police, we can... I need to go, Isaiah interrupted him, already getting dressed. I need to see the man who made me believe he was dead for 2 years. I need to understand why. Then I'm going with you. Vincent. Don't argue with me about this, Vincent said firmly, putting on his shirt. You're my husband now. That means we face things together. Half an hour later, they were in the car, driving through the silent streets of New York toward the Upper East Side. Isaiah looked out the window, trying to mentally prepare himself to see the man who had destroyed his family. trying to understand what kind of person Ezekiel Thompson had become in the 2 years since he had faked his own death. "What are you going to say to him?" Vincent asked, breaking the silence. "I don't know," Isaiah admitted. "For 2 years I mourned him, felt guilt for not being able to save him, and now to discover that he was alive all along, that he killed my mother." His voice failed. "I don't know what I feel. Anger, relief, disgust, all at the same time." "You don't need to decide now how you feel. You just need to decide how you want to handle the situation." Isaiah looked at Vincent, seeing determination and love in his expression. This man had married him a few hours earlier, knowing he was taking on not just a husband, but all his problems, all his complicated baggage, all the dark secrets of his family. "Why do you love me?" Isaiah asked suddenly. Vincent smiled, a tender expression crossing his face. "Because you make me want to be a better man. Because you carry so much light even after so much darkness. Because when I look at you, I see a future worth living." "Even knowing all this? Even knowing my father is a murderer, that my family ruined yours?" "Especially knowing that," Vincent said, taking Isaiah's hand, "because it means you chose to be different, chose to be good despite everything." When they arrived at Teresa's building, Vincent stopped the car but didn't turn off the engine. "Last chance," he said. "We can turn around and go home. Forget this call happened." Isaiah considered the option for a moment. It would be easy. Run away again, avoid the confrontation, leave the past buried. But he was no longer the man who ran, not after all he had discovered about himself, not after finding Vincent. "No," he said, opening the car door. "It's time to face the ghosts." When they got out of the elevator on the 12th floor, they could hear voices coming from Teresa's apartment. The door was ajar, and through the gap, Isaiah could see Richard's silhouette standing in the living room, and then he heard it, a voice he thought he would never hear again, his father's voice. "Where is my son?" Isaiah stopped in front of the door, his hand frozen on the doorknob. On the other side was the man who had raised him, who had taught him about morality and virtue, who had destroyed all that with his own hands. On the other side was Ezekiel Thompson, murderer and liar. On the other side was the truth he had spent a week trying to avoid. Vincent gently touched his shoulder. "Ready?" Isaiah took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and opened the door. It was time to face his past in order to build his future. When Isaiah pushed the door and entered the apartment, time seemed to stop. There, sitting in the armchair he himself had chosen for Teresa weeks earlier, was Ezekiel Thompson, his father, alive, real, breathing. But he wasn't the man Isaiah remembered. Ezekiel had aged decades in just 2 years. His hair, previously only graying at the temples, was now completely white. His face was thin, almost cadaverous, marked by deep lines that spoke of guilt and suffering. His hands, which Isaiah remembered as strong and sure, trembled slightly on his knees. He wore simple, worn clothes, as if he had spent the last years sleeping in the open. When their eyes met, Ezekiel rose slowly, as if each movement was painful. "Isaiah," he said, and his voice was hoarse, broken. "My son." "Don't call me that." The words came out of Isaiah's mouth with a coldness that surprised him. "You lost the right to call me son the moment you killed my mother." Ezekiel recoiled, as if he had been slapped. "I know you hate me. I know I deserve all of this." "You don't deserve anything," Isaiah said, approaching. Vincent remained near the door, watching, ready to intervene if necessary. "You killed the woman you claimed to love. You started a fire that almost killed me too. You left me believing. I was an orphan for 2 years. I didn't want you to die," Ezekiel said desperately. "I never wanted to hurt you. When I saw you had escaped, I thanked God. It was a miracle." "Miracle?" Isaiah laughed, a bitter sound that echoed through the room. "A miracle would have been you finding another way to solve your problems. A miracle would have been you being the man you always pretended to be." Richard, who had remained silent until then, rose from the sofa where he was sitting. "So touching," he said sarcastically. "Family reunion. But perhaps we should focus on practical matters." Vincent moved to Isaiah's side, his presence solid and comforting. What practical matters, Richard? The future, dear brother. Richard smiled, but there was no humor in his expression. I brought Mr. Thompson here to clarify some things, for him to tell Isaiah personally about the plans we made together. What plans? Isaiah asked, a bad feeling growing in his chest. Ezekiel lowered his head, his hands trembling even more. Richard found me 6 months ago. I was hiding in a small town in Kentucky, working on a farm, trying to find some peace. And he made me a proposal. Ezekiel raised his eyes, and Isaiah saw tears in them. He said if I helped him recover what our family had stolen from the Wilsons over 100 years ago, he would give me enough money to disappear forever, to never cause pain to anyone again. Vincent tensed beside Isaiah. What kind of help? Richard wanted me to convince Isaiah to renounce the inheritance, Ezekiel continued, his voice getting weaker. Said a repentant father, begging forgiveness, would be more effective than direct threats. Son of a bitch, Vincent murmured, but Richard just smiled more widely. Very perceptive, brother. Although I must admit the plan has become complicated when I discovered you got married today. Richard took an envelope from the inside pocket of his blazer. Fortunately, I have a plan B. What plan B? Isaiah asked, though he feared the answer. Richard opened the envelope and removed several photographs. Very interesting photographs of dear Ezekiel, some from 2 years ago, the night of the fire, others more recent, from when he was working on the farm in Kentucky. He spread the photographs on the coffee table. Isaiah approached reluctantly and saw images that made his stomach turn. His father putting something that looked like fuel around the house. His father leaving through the back while the flames were starting. His father, more recently, working under the scorching sun, thin and broken. Enough evidence to put him in prison for the rest of his life, Richard said casually. Premeditated murder, arson, faking his own death. He would be sentenced to at least 30 years. And what do you want in exchange? Vincent asked, though he already knew the answer. Isaiah renounces the inheritance, signs all necessary documents to transfer the 45 million to me, and in exchange these photographs disappear forever. Richard put the images back in the envelope, and Mr. Thompson here remains free to live his last years in peace. The silence that followed was tense, laden with conflicting emotions. Isaiah looked at his father, seeing the broken man he had become, and then at Richard, seeing the cold satisfaction in his eyes. It was a perfect trap. Save the man who had destroyed his family, or let him pay for his crimes. How long have you been planning this? Isaiah asked. Years, Richard admitted. Since my father died, I knew I would have to restore the family's honor. When Teresa altered the will to include you, I knew I would need to be creative. And you? Isaiah turned to Ezekiel. You agreed to this? I had no choice, Ezekiel said, tears running down his face. He said if I didn't help, he would make you pay for my crimes, that he would find a way to put you in prison too. That's a lie, Vincent said firmly. Isaiah didn't commit any crime. But sons pay for the sins of the fathers, Richard said philosophically, and I'm very creative when it comes to making people pay for old debts. Teresa, who had remained silent in her wheelchair near the window, finally spoke. Enough. Her voice was firm, authoritative, laden with decades of experience and wisdom. Enough of these manipulations, these blackmails, this sick obsession with revenge. Aunt, Richard began, but she interrupted him with a gesture. You heard Jean-Pierre too, Richard. You were there when he made his predictions. You heard when he said the debts between our families would only be settled through forgiveness, not revenge. Jean-Pierre was a charlatan, Richard said, but there was less conviction in his voice. Was he? Teresa smiled. He predicted that Isaiah would appear, predicted that he and Vincent would fall in love, predicted that you would marry quickly. She leaned forward, and he predicted one last thing which I never told you. What? Vincent asked. That the person who would break the cycle of revenge wouldn't be Isaiah. It would be Ezekiel Thompson. That he would have a chance at redemption, to choose love instead of fear. All eyes turned to Ezekiel, who was standing in the middle of the living room, trembling. "I don't understand." "Jean-Pierre said a moment would come when you would have to choose," Teresa continued, "between saving yourself or saving your son, between perpetuating the mistakes of the past or breaking them forever." "That moment has come," Vincent said. "Understanding. You can let Richard use you to blackmail Isaiah, or you can do the right thing." Ezekiel looked at his son, seeing the man he had become despite everything he had gone through, seeing the strength, the kindness, the love that radiated from him, even after discovering the most painful truths about his family. "Richard," Ezekiel said slowly, turning to the younger man, "I've changed my mind." "What?" "I won't help you anymore." Ezekiel straightened his shoulders, seeming to find some inner strength that he had lost years ago. "My son deserves that inheritance, deserves a chance at happiness, and I won't be the instrument to take that away from him." Richard's face contorted with anger. "You're making a mistake, old man. Without my protection, you're going to prison." "Maybe that's where I deserve to be," Ezekiel said simply. "Maybe it's time to pay for my crimes." "Dad," Isaiah said, and for the first time since he entered the apartment, there was something beyond anger in his voice. "So you don't need to—" "I do," Ezekiel interrupted him. "I need to do one right thing in my life. I need to protect you the way I should have protected your mother." Richard turned red with anger. "Very well," he said, taking his phone from his pocket. "I'm going to call the police right now. I'm going to hand over the photographs. I'm going to—" "You won't," Vincent said calmly. "Oh, no? And who's going to stop me?" Vincent smiled, and there was something predatory in that smile. "I am." He took out his own phone and showed the screen to Richard. "I've been recording this entire conversation. Blackmail, threats, conspiracy to commit fraud. I have enough evidence to put you in prison for a decade." Richard paled. "You wouldn't dare. I'm your brother." "You're a criminal," Vincent corrected. "And I'm very tired of cleaning up your messes." He approached Richard, his dominant presence filling the space. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to destroy these photographs. You're going to leave the United States and never come back. And if I find out you've come near Isaiah, Teresa, or any member of this family again, I'll use this recording to destroy your life." "You can't banish me from the family." "I can, and I am." Vincent didn't back down. "The company is mine now. The nursing homes are mine. The family money is mine. And I don't want any of it shared with a man who would blackmail an orphan out of greed." Richard looked around the room, seeking support, but found only determined faces and hostile looks. Finally, his features contorted into an expression of pure hatred. "You'll regret this," he said, but his voice lacked the authority of before. "This family is cursed. You will never be happy." "We already are," Isaiah said, taking Vincent's hand, "and we don't need your blessing for that." Richard snorted, but began heading for the door. Before leaving, he turned one last time. "And you, Ezekiel? Still going to confess your crimes like the noble hero you're pretending to be?" Ezekiel looked at Isaiah, seeing love and forgiveness growing in his son's eyes. "I'll do what's best for Isaiah. If that means confessing and going to prison, then that's what I'll do." "Actually," Teresa said softly, "perhaps there's another option." Everyone turned to her. "What option?" Vincent asked. "Jean-Pierre mentioned something about expiation through service," she said thoughtfully, "about how the crimes of the past could be balanced through good deeds in the present." "What do you mean?" Isaiah asked. "There's an orphanage in Virginia that needs help. A place for children who have lost their families in tragedies." Teresa leaned forward. "With part of Isaiah's inheritance, you could finance an expansion, and Ezekiel could work there, taking care of these children, giving them the love and protection he couldn't give his own family." The silence that followed was laden with possibilities. Isaiah looked at his father, seeing a broken man who might still find redemption. He looked at Vincent, seeing unconditional support in his eyes. He looked at Teresa, seeing wisdom and compassion. "Would it be enough," he asked, "to balance the crimes?" "For me it would be," Teresa said. "And in the end, that's what matters. Forgiveness has to come from within the family. Isaiah approached his father, stopping a few meters away. Would you do that? Dedicate the rest of your life to caring for orphan children? I would do anything to try to make up for the harm. I caused, Ezekiel said, tears running down his face. Anything to deserve even a little, the forgiveness I see growing in your eyes. Then it's decided, Isaiah said. You'll go to the orphanage. You'll work with the children. And if someday you manage to find peace with what you did, perhaps we can try to rebuild some kind of relationship. You forgive me? Ezekiel asked, his voice broken with hope. Isaiah thought about this. About years of anger, of grief, of unanswered questions, about the man who had been his father and the man he had become, about the power of forgiveness to heal wounds that seemed impossible to heal. I'm learning to forgive, he finally said. And maybe that's enough for now. Ezekiel nodded, understanding it was more than he deserved. Thank you, my son, for giving me a chance I didn't deserve. An hour later, after Richard had left the country with his tail between his legs and Ezekiel had departed for Virginia with a check and a promise to do better, Isaiah and Vincent found themselves alone in the apartment with Teresa. So, Teresa said, a satisfied smile on her lips, how do you feel now that all the family drama has been resolved? Exhausted, Vincent admitted, dropping onto the sofa. Relieved, Isaiah added, sitting beside him. And in love? Teresa asked with a little laugh. Definitely in love, Vincent said, pulling Isaiah into his arms. Good, because I have one. A last confession to make. The two men turned to her, cautious. What confession? Isaiah asked. Jean-Pierre never existed. The silence that followed was absolute. What? Vincent finally managed to say. I made up the whole story about the prophecies, the predictions, the French medium. Teresa was smiling openly now. It was all part of an elaborate plan to bring you two together. But how did you know Isaiah would appear? How did you know we would fall in love? Vincent asked, astonished. I didn't know, Teresa admitted. But I hoped. You two were alone, hurt, needing something real in your lives. I thought if I put you in the same situation, maybe nature would follow its course. You manipulated our entire lives, Isaiah said, but there was no anger in his voice. There was admiration. I manipulated the circumstances, Teresa corrected. You two made the choices, chose to fall in love, chose to fight for each other, chose to build something beautiful out of all the chaos. Vincent began to laugh, a low sound that grew into a full laugh. She completely fooled us. And it worked. Isaiah added, also beginning to laugh. God, it worked perfectly. So you're not angry? Teresa asked, seeming genuinely concerned for the first time. How could we be angry? Vincent said, kissing Isaiah's forehead. You gave us each other. And an inheritance of $45 million, Isaiah added. Oh, about that, Teresa said casually. The inheritance is real, it always was. I just created the story about the prophecies to make everything more dramatic. Dramatic, Vincent repeated. Teresa, you should have been a soap opera writer. Who says I wasn't? She replied with a wink. 2 hours later, Vincent and Isaiah were back at their house in the Hamptons, lying on the king-size bed, watching the ocean through the ceiling windows. So, Vincent said, tracing lazy circles on Isaiah's chest. How do you feel? Knowing our great epic love was orchestrated by an 80-year-old lady. Like it's still a great epic love, Isaiah replied, turning to look at him. The circumstances may have been manipulated, but what we feel is real. Is it? Vincent smiled, that smile that still made Isaiah's heart race. And what do you feel? I feel that for the first time in my life, I know who I am, Isaiah said, his hands moving to Vincent's face. I'm Isaiah Wilson, husband of Vincent Wilson, heir to a fortune that I'm going to use to do good in the world. I'm a man who is no longer afraid to desire, to love, to live. Isaiah Wilson, Vincent repeated, savoring the name. I like how it sounds. And you? How do you feel? I feel that at 56 I've finally found the person who makes everything worthwhile, Vincent said, kissing him softly. I feel that I can stop building walls and start building bridges. What kind of bridges? Between our families. Between the past and the future. Between the man I was and the man I want to be with you. Vincent leaned over Isaiah, supporting himself on his elbows. And I want to build a family of our own. It doesn't have to be traditional. It doesn't have to follow rules. It just has to be ours. What kind of family do you have in mind? Vincent smiled, and there was something playful in his expression. Well, for starters, I think Teresa should move in here. This house is too big for just the two of us, and she obviously needs constant supervision to prevent her from orchestrating more dramatic family reunions. And then? Then maybe we can adopt some of the children from the orphanage where your father is going to work. Give them what you never had, a family that loves them unconditionally. Tears formed in Isaiah's eyes. Throughout his life, he had been taught that men like them couldn't have families, couldn't build homes, couldn't leave positive legacies in the world. But looking at Vincent, seeing love and determination in his eyes, he could imagine all of that. He could see a future full of children's laughter, of family dinners, of love that grew instead of diminishing with time. That sounds perfect, he whispered. It will be perfect, Vincent said, kissing him again, because we'll build it together. And when you truly love someone, when you're willing to fight for them, when you're willing to change for them, everything becomes possible. Outside, the ocean continued its eternal waves, indifferent to the human dramas unfolding on land. But inside the house overlooking its waters, two men who had found each other against all odds made plans for a future that would be built on love instead of revenge, on forgiveness instead of resentment, on hope instead of fear. Months later, when Teresa moved into the Hamptons' house and began to fill the rooms with plants and stories about her days as a pianist, when the first adopted children ran through the hallways, bringing life and joy to spaces that had previously seemed too large, when Ezekiel sent his first letter from the orphanage talking about the children he was helping and the peace he was slowly finding, Isaiah knew that all the difficult decisions had been worth it. He had lost the family he was born into, but had found the family he had chosen. He had lost the faith of his childhood, but had found faith in something greater, in the transformative power of love. And every night, when he lay beside the man who had changed his life, Isaiah whispered a prayer of gratitude, not to the severe God of his childhood, but to whatever force in the universe had conspired to bring them together, because some loves were predestined. Some loves were stronger than blood, more lasting than resentment, more powerful than fear, and some loves were capable of rewriting not just the future, but also the past, healing wounds that seemed impossible to heal, and building bridges over chasms that seemed impassable. The love of Isaiah and Vincent was one of those loves, and they lived happily ever after. Not because they didn't face more challenges. Life always brings challenges, but because they learned that together they could face anything. And in the end they discovered that was the only truth that really mattered.